Hey guys, this is Ryan. I'm here with Paul, Sam, and Dom, and another Paul is here today. And this is Gear There and Everywhere. What are we going to talk about
That
today,
would
guys?
the other Paul be me?
Oh yeah, that would be right.
Oh, I see. I see.
So who is this Paul?
Who is
I
this
want-
Paul?
I don't know who this Paul is. My wife says that all the time. I don't know who I'm married to.
Well, this is Paul Reed Smith, who happens to live not too far away from me, and we are fortunate enough to have him on today to talk about some stuff maybe he doesn't always talk about.
The Beatles I don't talk about hardly all, but I do adore it, and I do have stories.
Oh, great. We love to hear him. Let's see.
All right.
We definitely got lots of questions. So,
All right.
other Paul, did you want to start with the question you had?
Well, question I have for you, Paul, is how did the Beatles influence some of your guitar building?
So my mother came home one day with an album cover of a bunch of people with males with long hair, a black cover, and they're all in turtlenecks. And she said, these guys are going to be big. Now, at the time, to have long hair was wildly out of bounds. Although it always confused me that Jesus on the cross had long hair, but why wasn't it okay for us to have long hair? I didn't understand that one, right? But, you know, the beginnings of having a band go from a big band to you could do it in your garage, Elvis started that. You know, with 30 people in the band, all of a sudden he could do it with 3 or 4. And the Beatles were doing it with 4, and they were making a hell of a beautiful racket. As my son Sam said to me, Daddy, why don't people sing about love anymore like the Beatles? So, you know, it was fascinating. So how did it influence my guitar making? Because it was the beginning of my introduction to modern day pop music. And my brother and I must have put in, at the time, somebody had disconnected the quarter to play the jukebox at an event, and we played She Loves You literally 50 times.
Would that record have been Meet the Beatles? The
Well,
early one?
She Loves You was on the Beatles too. Meet the Beatles was the record that my mother brought home. You know, there were bells on the hill, and I saw her standing there, and I want to hold your hand, and you name it, it was all in there.
So it's safe to say the Beatles pretty much got you into music for the most part. If it wasn't for them, they kind of got you into the realm of getting real, or I should say more serious with music and understanding it.
It was a big part of it.
Big part of it.
A big part of it. She Loves You 50 times on the jukebox was fascinating.
Yeah.
It wasn't recorded well. It was recorded extraordinarily well and mastered incredibly well. And every single time it came erupting out of the jukebox. It was just, you know, couldn't even believe it was happening.
Yeah.
It had a real influence on me. There's no question. One of those songs was played at my first wedding. You know, they were breaking every rule. It was cool. It was really something. And you know, then my brother brought home a record, said, these guys are going to be huge. They're huge in England. And it ended up being Jimi Hendrix. So I had a few of these experiences, but they were watching. Did anybody, were any of you old enough to ever see him on the Ed Sullivan Show?
The oldest of us is the other Paul, and he was born when?
I was born 1989, so
Nah,
unfortunately no.
nah.
Close.
You were egging your mother's ovary.
Oh, yeah.
Look, when they played on the Ed Sullivan Show, it was a national event. And as the story goes, they didn't want much money for it. They just wanted to guarantee they get to play twice. And, you know, for them, you know, it was life-changing. And John Lennon used to say to the band, boys, we ain't going to America till we're #1. We ain't going to America till we're boys. We're not. That was unbelievable what they did. There's pictures of George Harrison doing sound check without his pants on because there was a rip in his pants and they were sewing it up as fast as they could. Have you seen that picture?
Yeah. I actually don't know if I knew that story, but I've seen the photo.
Yeah.
The batch of photos, yeah.
Yeah. You know, there's a lot about the Beatles that is fascinating. I know some inside stories because my friend Bertie Marsden, who just passed away, was really good friends with George Harrison, and he used to tell stories that aren't in the books. But to read the Playboy interviews with John Lennon talking about every song, it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. You know, the real story between all the tunes and how much John and Paul relied on each other.
Yeah, so some of the other stuff we wanted to talk with you about, if we get in a little more to specifics, was, well, let's see. So there's, Sam, you had the question about recording, if you wanna ask that one.
Yeah, Paul. So part of our podcast is looking at a song and hearing like the recorded sound and determining what guitar it was. But obviously, once studio mastery and trickery goes into it, it's not always easy. Do you think that that's an important thing for a guitar, like how it sounds on a record, or do you think it's a bit of a moot point, given that the studio can change the EQ, compression, and everything?
I think it's incredibly important. I never tried to figure out which guitar it was, but I was always fascinated by the sound of it and by the musicality of it and the extraordinary chord structure of the tunes. There's a guy in our town named Brian Ewald that knows just about every Beatles tune ever written. And his insight, I mean, one of the things, if you want to be a musician, if you learn all the Beatles tunes, you know an awful lot about chord changes and harmony and melody. I mean, I've got my Beatles stories. You know, I'll give you one of them. A melody is a string of notes that sounds like one thing. So if I go da 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 ba da 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 ba da da da, you know it's Happy Birthday. It sounds like one thing. How did John Lennon get away with two notes? Da 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 da. Oh my God. It's genius. It's absolute genius.
Or
I mean,
one chord on Tomorrow Never Knows.
Yeah, well, I adore it. So, look, they were experimenting with fuzz tones. They were experimenting with microphone placement. Have you ever seen the video of Paul McCartney playing Blackbird Sings in the Dead of the Night with his high heels and his bell bottoms and one microphone, and he pulls it off in the first take? Did you ever seen that?
Yes, the Apple promotional video, I think is what you're talking about.
Oh, I don't know if it's promotional, but there's an Apple video of them putting a Neumann pencil mic up on him, and he burns it down. I mean, here's a way to know how good the Beatles were. What's the name of the band that did that? The guy that sings "Only the Lonely." There was a whole bunch of them: Jeff Lynne, Roy Orbison, and Tom Petty, and all of them.
That was the Traveling Wilburys.
Traveling Wilburys. And we're talking about some of the greatest musicians in the world, right? And they're all going up to the mic and singing this one tune. And when George Harrison walks up to the mic, you melt. The sound of his voice was unbelievable. And in that moment, you know the third singer in that band is just devastatingly good. Same thing happened in the Dionne Warwick video with Friends. It was Stevie Wonder, Gladys Knight, Elton John, and Stevie Wonder was one other musician. Anyway, they all sing, Dionne Warwick. And you're just like, you can't even believe what you're hearing. But when Gladys Knight opens her mouth, Stevie Wonder starts going nuts and starts cheering because it's unbelievable, right? That's the Beatles. They were that good. And John didn't like the sound of his voice. He was always asking him to change it. But I'm sorry, as he said, we were a good little band. They were really something. Lovely, lovely musicians. And what the tunes are about fascinates me, and I don't know, them playing on the roof, it fascinates me. All of it's just extraordinary.
And the guitar tones evolved over time, obviously.
Yeah, they got better and better and better and better and better and better and better. And George Martin kept getting better and better at them. Just listen to Taxman. Oh, my God. I mean, there's so much stuff going on. That's McCartney playing the solo.
Yeah.
On George Harrison's tune.
Yeah, that's one of the things we wanted to ask you about. Is so the Beatles don't really use a lot of humbuckers for a while in the early stuff, and we were curious your thoughts on Gretsch pickups and Rickenbacker pickups, because that's
I thought Gretsch pickups were humbuckers.
They're Filtertron, so I guess in essence, but I guess I mean like what is it, PAF? Is that the right word?
You're talking about a Gibson humbucker versus a Gretsch humbucker.
Right. Yeah. But they also did have like the Dynasonics and the High-Lotrons, which are a bit more single coily in the sound.
Yeah.
But I was curious what you thought of those.
Good recording instruments. What I'm taken by is not their prowess on which guitar to pick for which tune. What I'm taken by is what they played, and watching them assemble a tune in the videos is extraordinary. What about this and what about that? What if we go here? What if we go there? I mean, the rehearsals were just a bunch of musicians. To watch Billy Preston join the band so that they behaved better, which was interesting because, it was so intimate and so powerful and so world-changing that having him in the band gave him a balance.
You're right, though. They did end up behaving better when they brought in Billy Preston. Yeah,
they said it. Lennon goes on to record Imagine, and Baby I'm Amazed. Paul goes on to record that, and George goes on to record some of the best music he ever did. And to me, that was indicative of how powerful it was. One of the records, they let George play 3 tunes on Revolver. Was that 3 tunes he played on Revolver?
Yeah, Taxman. I
something.
Want to tell you, something's a little bit later, and Love You Too is the 3rd one.
Yeah, unbelievable, powerful songwriters. My favorite story is and this is a story, I don't know if it's true. The story was that they wrote his tune every day, John and Paul, and they wanted to be like Rodgers and Hammerstein. They wanted to be one of the great songwriting duos of all time. So they get together every morning and write a tune. And one morning, they're coming up snake eyes, can't come up with anything. And on the TV says, "Good day, sunshine." Oh, shit, they were off to the races. Come on. Are you that good? Are you that good?
Yeah, there's definitely a bunch of examples of them making something out of nothing. So,
well,
they're kind of like a prime example, too, like we were talking about with the Gretsch pickups. I mean, everything back in the day wasn't the best quality. I mean, the Gretches, even the Hofner, a lot of those guitars weren't the best. So the fact that they were able to use guitars that were substandard for the time and come up with some of the best music and play a lot of the things flawlessly, too, goes to show a lot about them.
Well, I don't know. I like those guitars, those Gretsch guitars.
Well, like the Tennessean technically was supposed to be the, lowest end version of the Gretches back at that time.
Well, same thing with the Epiphone P90 guitar that John played. That was a ES330 by Epiphone, right?
Right.
Here's a story you guys, everybody, or your podcast people like. When Ted McCarty bought Epiphone, he was buying a string bass company. He had bought from Epi, the guy that ran it, all the tooling for string basses, and he paid money for the company and bought Epiphone. When the trucks got there, the truck was full of guitar jigs. He didn't know they made guitars. So all of a sudden they had another guitar line. And so that 330 that John played was an Epiphone. Wasn't a 335, it was a 330 with P90s, and it did a fine job.
Well, those Kalamazoo made Epiphones were made in the same factory as the Gibson ones.
That's correct.
The Gibson ES330 was, in essence, the Epiphone Casino.
Yeah, that's right.
Which was the same guitar minus the name on the headstock.
Different headstock shape, but yeah, same guitar. Look, it was the same thing as Evinrude Johnson. You could get the Evinrude outboard or the Johnson outboard made in the same factory. It gave him 2 sets of dealers. That's what he turned it into. It's brilliant, actually. Look, in the day, a Fender Stratocaster and an amp and a Gibson, Les Paul Custom, the Strat and the Les Paul Custom are the same money. They were head-to-head competitors. And the Gretsch guitar that we're talking about, maybe it was the low-end one, but it sure sounded good on record. Brian Setzer proved that over and over again.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. I had heard at some point several years ago that you were not a fan of Gretsch pickups, so I'm excited to hear this.
How can you not be a fan of something that gets that tone? It never called my name for knowing enough about them for our guitars. But a lot of that came from the old shop where I would get a Gretsch guitar and it would have a big pad taped to the back of it or buttoned to the back of it and a tuning fork hanging off the bridge down into the body. Some of the stuff on Gretsch guitars didn't make any guitar sense to me. That doesn't mean I didn't like the pickups. I mean, if I had a White Falcon right now or 10 of them, I could pay for my grandchildren's colleges. Clearly, they knew what they were doing. I don't really have a problem with it. It's just that, for me, in my shop, when an old Telly came in, oh my God. When an old Strat came in, oh my God. When an old Les Paul came in, oh my God. An old P-Bass or stack bass jazz bass, stack pot jazz bass came in, oh my God. When a Gretsch came in, I had a job to do. They were harder to repair and they were harder to get to sound good. But, I didn't have a problem with it, but it just wasn't something that was, if I did that, was I going to be able to make a living? You got to remember, I was trying to make a living in that shop in Annapolis. I needed my customers incredibly happy, happier with the guitars that I made them than the guitars that they could buy. I'm not in competition with my competitors. I'm in competition with 2 million vintage guitars.
Did you, in that time, did you also come across many Rickenbackers?
Sure.
Any special opinions about those?
Did you know you can slide the truss rods all the way out of a Rickenbacker bass without taking it apart?
I did not know that.
Yeah, well, that's actually not cool. Rickenbackers are hard to work on too. I had a Rickenbacker guitar. I liked the bass pickup for solos and chords. The treble pickup was too bright. I don't know. I mean, at the time, the bass player in Yes was playing a 4001 Rickenbacker bass, and Geddy Lee was playing one. So how could you not like them? But they were hard to work on, and they were really hard to get the truss rods to work.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. The factory seems to have, I think they were told, I don't remember what decade this would have been, but that there was new limits on emissions at some point, and they were told they either needed to move their factory somewhere else or change the way they made guitars, but they just decided, well, just make less guitars and not change anything. And so that's what they ended up doing. And so there's a crazy wait list for them now.
Okay. I know a little bit more about that than I'm willing to talk about.
Okay.
I don't think it was the California clean air laws that stopped their production, but that's just me. But they've been very kind of secretive about how many they could make, how many they did make, how long they've been back ordered, how many they do make. I don't know. It's an interesting business. The other day, a rock star who I've been after for 20 years finally picked up one of my guitars, and he goes, "Well, Paul, this is the best one you've ever brought me." And I didn't think much about it until he said, "Well, I'd like to take it home." I said, "Okay." And he's walking onto the stage, he looks at the tech, he goes, "I'll play it on the 7th song." My jaw hit the floor. They were tracking me for 20 years, And for them, it wasn't good enough. And then finally, when it was good enough, then they were okay with it. It was not like some sort of endorsement deal issue. It was some sort of guitar player that's looking for a tool to do a job with. Mm-hmm. And I think the Beatles were the same way. They were trying to do a job. They had written these beautiful songs, and they needed them recorded.
Yeah, we definitely know that the Beatles, George was definitely the one most interested in getting a lot of guitars, but I don't think they cared nearly as much. Like, Paul would not have been using that Hofner as long as he was if he cared as much about like having the newest, coolest thing or something like that. I don't think they spent a whole lot of time.
Except the Hofner sounded good on the tracks.
Oh yeah, it sounded fine.
Yeah.
But it was. I mean, he put piano strings on. Well, not on that. On the on his Rossetti back in Hamburg, he had even put piano strings on the guitar. So they didn't know what they were doing. They were mixing and matching strings constantly, possibly having flat wounds mixed with round wounds. There's a whole bunch of
why
crazy
not?
stuff going on.
You know,
look, look, they didn't have 9s or 10s. They were buying banjo strings. These bands like Led Zeppelin were buying banjo strings and putting them on guitars so they could bend the strings. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck Berry did that.
Did he?
It's known that he did that. Because at the time, from what I had heard, some of these guitars, they came with flat wounds.
Yeah.
So you couldn't bend them.
Yeah.
So banjo strings were a lot lighter, and they were easier to bend.
To do.
You know, back on the topic of Rickenbacker, because I have an opinion on them myself. I always thought of them as kind of like the Rolls-Royce of guitars. They are very cool. They look cool, but except for the basses, they're incredibly versatile. But the guitars, you couldn't play them for things like you couldn't see guys like Eddie Van Halen using one. They were good for what they were.
They
good
were
with.
Rolls-Royce because they look cool, but you never race one. Is that what you said?
You're not going to be driving a Rolls-Royce to to work or to bop around town in. They look cool, and what they're good at, they're really good at.
And they're expensive.
I've never looked at the guitar business from the Beatles' point of view. I mean, we made guitars for Robin Ford, and he wanted a red guitar because when he played with George Harrison, he was playing a red Les Paul. And I made him a guitar that I don't like. I have asked Robin back 4 times. His answer is no. But, that was that red Les Paul that changed Robin's mind about red guitars and Les Pauls. Mm. But it was because George Harrison was playing one. I mean, did you hear what was the guy who was the arranger for the band, the fifth Beatle?
Just George Martin.
George Martin. George Martin said when they heard the very first tapes of the Beatles, he goes, "Oh, they have a wonderful guitar player." He was talking about George Harrison. For him, recording-wise, that was really going to help.
Of course.
I don't know. Look, you got a band of geniuses. I don't know if Ringo Starr was a genius, but there's no question in my mind that between George and Paul and John, there were geniuses in the band, and Like Water had found its own level. And, with all due respect, those tracks that Ringo Starr did were so musical, it's not even funny. I mean, just ridiculously musical. It wasn't ahead of the beat. It wasn't behind the beat. It fit the tune. They got a fundamental track that did the job.
Yeah, he was definitely a human metronome.
Yeah, why not? Yeah. Let me ask you guys a question. What's the one thing about the Beatles that you just drops your jaw and you can't believe?
For me, the fact that they were able to leave such an impact on the world and in music. The fact that they were able to just change so much, where other bands have come and gone and left so, like Nirvana, everything else, such a big impact. But Nothing like the Beatles. Nothing like the wave. And thankfully, my dad was a teenager at that time, and he was able to experience it and tell me all the stories. And it was just nuts. It was like nothing he had ever seen.
For me, it'd be like I gravitate towards songs that I would find the most impactful, which would probably be Strawberry Fields Forever and A Day in the Life, because those ones are the ones where, like, not only did they get really creative in the studio, but they did it in a way where melody was very important, and you cannot underestimate Paul as an earworm creator because that was like very important, very valuable, in addition to having the great harmonies. And
at the time, the song "Help" was very powerful. I mean, the songs that are forgotten now are the ones that had such impact. "She Loves You," "Help." Wow.
I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Not that was a set the band up for success later tune. What a band! I mean, Something has always been really powerful.
Well, Paul, we're just gonna have to stop now and ask you that question. What's your favorite Beatles song? Can be a few of them. You want to have like a top 2 or 3, that's fine. But if you have a 1, that'd be great.
Oh boy.
And it's funny.
Got a good reason. Have you ever heard Tommy Emmanuel play all 3 parts on the guitar?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I think he plays that song live every time he plays.
It's just ridiculous. First time I heard it do it, the tears are streaming down my face. I'm going, is he that good? And the answer to that question was yes, he is.
He's superhuman.
I got an odd one I like. I like 8 Days a Week.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's
you know why? Because if you start singing it in a crowd of people, everybody will sing along. I have John Lennon's handwritten words to one of his tunes on my wall that my wife gave me for Father's Day that Yoko Ono sold her. Yoko Ono had a show that went around the country, and you could buy John Lennon's handwritten words framed. Wow. It's called A Real Love. It's beautiful handwriting, just stunning. A Day in the Life, when Jeff Beck did it, bring tears to your eyes. You know, there's a lot of tunes that had their impact. My favorite, I'm not going to answer my favorite song. I'm going to answer my favorite record. I thought Revolver, they were peaking.
Yeah, I would put Revolver as my favorite. I think that's like best as a group, because there's a lot of stuff after that production is amazing, but it feels a little bit more like one guy's song with some other people on it, and Revolver feels the most cohesive that they did, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too.
That's what I was gonna say about like asking about like what's the thing about the Beatles that sustains or that impacts you. Like, I've heard those songs so many times, but when you watch the footage of them playing live, even on the rooftop, it feels like they're the same band in Hamburg. Like, they just had this vocabulary and connection with each other that, like, it still amazes me to watch the live performances.
Have you ever really listened to the words and get back and decided what the tune's about?
Oh, I'm sure. I've decided a long time ago that Paul writes songs about nothing a lot of the time.
I think that tune is based in anger, but that's a different conversation. We'll have to have that one off the air.
All right.
Did you watch the Get Back documentary, all 8 hours, Paul?
No, but I watched all the film before. Actually, it wasn't. Yeah, Get Back was powerful. Come Together was powerful. I didn't watch the all 8 hours because I had watched all the film beforehand, and some of it made me highly uncomfortable because I've been in bands where And when George is saying, "I'll do whatever you want, Paul, do whatever you want," it just made me come out of my skin because I've seen that happen in a band, and it's hard. It's hard to deal with. What was the movie about the band that couldn't find the Agora Ballroom, and Nigel Tufnell and
was that Spinal Tap?
Spinal Tap. I didn't think the movie was funny at all. I thought it was not anything I wanted to watch. And they were like, "Why didn't you think it's funny, Paul?" I said, "Because everything in that movie happened to me."
It's too real.
The bass player did try to get his girlfriend to manage the band. You know, they didn't make the thing right. And my kids were crying, laughing, watching it. I was just not funny. They said, "Why?" I said, "Because all that stuff really happened."
It was like a documentary of Paul's life.
So I was in Germany. I'm standing with Derek St. Holmes, the singer that sang Stranglehold. And this English, roadie walks up to me and goes, "David St. Hubbins." I went, "What?" And Derek goes, "Yeah, it was me." And Nigel Tufnell's Ted Nugent. Derek St. Hubbins is Derek St. Holmes. And Nigel Tufnell's Ted Nugent. And the band that couldn't find the stage was the Ted Nugent band in Cleveland in the Agora Ballroom. And all those stories were gotten by two actors that went on the road with Aerosmith and Nugent. So, I see this, when I see the film, it makes me uncomfortable because I know that stuff in bands and it hurts. Watching that uncomfortable rehearsal where somebody's written a tune and they're trying to get it to turn into something. I mean, the end is beautiful and they were probably very proud, but, there's scar tissue and all that.
If you're not in a band, and you haven't been through those experiences, you wouldn't know.
No, you wouldn't know.
Right.
But there's a place where where George Harrison says, Paul, I'll play whatever you want. Just tell me what to play. I'll play whatever you want. I'll play whatever you want. I'm sorry. You think that was fun for him? To know he's in a band of geniuses and just lay himself out, one of the greatest guitar players to ever record the guitar in the whole world, and just hand it over and go, "I'll do whatever you want." Does that sound like fun to you?
One of those things that stuck out to me in that documentary was George had all these songs, and he was presenting them to Lennon and McCartney, and they were shooting him down. Some of the greatest songs of all time.
Yeah, it didn't help that John was on heroin most of the time around then.
That's true.
I don't know much about his drug addiction. Was it really heroin?
Yeah, Yoko got him into heroin. And they were a bit relieved about it actually at the time because it got him off of LSD because he was taking LSD every day before that. So, yeah, and the one period where he writes a lot of the White Album stuff and some of the Abbey Road stuff is when they went to India and he got clean for like a couple months. And then he sort of went back into it right after that.
I know a lot of these stories from separate people, not from the documentary because they were around the band. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was around Queen when the movie was done. And the movie's inaccurate about one thing. These were not a bunch of young, nice guys. These were adult men that flat out knew what they were doing and knew how to play and knew how to manage and knew how to control the airwaves and knew exactly what they were doing. And they were forces to be reckoned with. And to me, okay, they were nice guys in the movie, but I didn't say they were not nice. What I said was they were powerful, adult, and they knew what they were doing. And that's not depicted that well in the movie. I mean, the Beatles knew who they were. I mean, they needed state police to even travel. It's unbelievable what was going on in that arena. There's one scene in the movie Help where they have to rehearse in a cage on the train to protect themselves. Did you see that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Hard Day's Night, I think.
Yeah, Hard Day's Night, right.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And there's another great tune, A Hard Day's Night. Hard Day's Night. I mean, I just start singing the melody. You don't even need the words to know what tune it is.
Yeah, just like what you did with Day Tripper, right off the rip. It's like the first like 3 notes of the hum, you already know.
Yeah. I've been watching Time and Me and going, I was like, are you that good? And the answer was, yeah, he's that good.
Yeah.
He makes it look effortless.
You think so? I think it looks like he looks fluid with it, but it doesn't look effortless to me. I saw Eric Johnson the other night, and he was warming up for 2 or 3 hours so he can play these tunes. I mean, what a guitar player! Oh my God! I mean, and the Beatles never got to see Eric play. I mean, maybe a few of them did, but I don't know. What did you ever hear what John Lennon said about all the hippie leaders? He met them all. And he goes, they couldn't lead anybody out of a paper bag. He was a real leader. He was really something. The back of our record that we just releasing now says that I thought we would outgrow war by now, but we haven't outgrown it, and I still adhere myself to imagine, because it's a song of hope that one day maybe this humanity will outgrow war. And I've written it on the back of the record, back of the CD.
There's a reason that the U.S. and Nixon were so afraid of Lennon, because he was so good at making people think differently. And
yeah, he was a real leader. A real leader. When he died, I looked at my brother and said, "We just lost the leader of our generation."
He had the influence over people.
I mean, they didn't understand him and his wife getting naked in a bed and talking about peace, but he was trying to get everybody's attention, which he got.
And he did. And he did.
Yeah, he was probably one of the first to use some negative attention, too, to try to really push his message out there, too. Especially at that time of day. I mean, geez,
Did you ever see the album cover with the babies and the blood and the...
Oh,
yeah. Butcher cover.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, they wanted it to get released that way, and it did for a bit, but it got pulled in the U.S.
Why'd they do it? Does anybody ever say in the documentaries what they were thinking?
I think they were trying to... Well, there's a joke that possibly what they were annoyed at is how it's called the Butcher cover, because Capitol was butchering their albums and cutting up the track listings so they could make more albums. So in the UK, they would release 14 tracks per album. In the US, they would release 12. And they'd make extra albums every once in a while. And they just sort of mix and match them. And by that point, like around Rubber Soul era, that's when the album as an idea becomes its own thing rather than just singles being important. And so
that's the first time I've understood the reasoning. They thought their records were getting butchered. Yeah. It makes so much sense. But it's a pretty dark joke.
I mean, I think it's also... There's a bit of that there. It's like that's possible that's what the reasoning was. It's also possible they were just like, we don't care. We'll screw around. Doesn't matter what we do. People will buy it. Because around like a year after that, actually a little bit around that, it was around the time that John had the "We're more popular than Jesus" quote, and there started to be all these Beatle burnings in the Midwest and across the U.S. where people were like, we can't allow him to say this. We're going to burn our Beatles albums. And they said, you already bought it. We don't care what you do with our albums.
You know what he meant by the comment?
Just that they were more popular. It's the way he saw it, like on TV, like it's crazy.
He was right. Yeah, he was right though. He was fully right. But the problem was that people couldn't handle the truth. That was
it was taken out of context. He was disgusted by the fact that he was more popular than Jesus. Yeah. He wasn't that happy about it. He was making social commentary.
Yeah.
And they took it all wrong.
Yeah, he didn't even know it was going to get reported. He was just talking with his friend.
Well, so much for his friend.
Do you remember where you were when John Lennon died?
Yep, I know exactly where I was. I had just written a tune called "Make Me Cry," and we were rehearsing it. It was a Roy Buchanan tune I had written, and my brother walked in and told me that he had just been shot, and we were rehearsing a tune called "Make Me Cry." Swear to God.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Was it hard to play after that?
No. It was the theme song of Annapolis for years, and we played it the other night at the Songwriters Festival. We play it all the time. No, because in my world, you know, I had heard Roy Buchanan and I wanted to, but this tune was beautiful. And you asked me if I remembered where I was. That's exactly what, and the musicians that I was rehearsing the tune with are not the musicians I ended up playing with. They were just some friends we got together. And I said, written this song, can we try and play it? And my brother walked in and said, well, John Lennon's been shot. It wasn't a good feeling. There were 3 of those deaths. It was John Lennon, Robert F. Kennedy, and John F. Kennedy. And all 3 of them were horrible. The worst of the 3 was Robert F. Kennedy. He was going to be president. He had just won the California primary, and it took his ass out.
Yeah, 1968 was a crazy year. Lots of stuff happening there.
Yeah. Look, you know something? Those amplifiers that they used, those mics that they used, those guitars that they used, the chord changes they used, they're called the Beatles because they wanted a name like the Crickets. Did you know that?
Yeah.
And I think it was the worst name ever invented. The Beatles? Are you kidding me? But they were so good, nobody gave a shit, and nobody's ever said it. I mean, has anybody ever said it's a terrible name for a band?
No.
Huh?
I think it's better than Jerry and the Pacemakers.
It was Jerry and the Pacemakers, and the Beatles were their music. You switch the music, we'd be having Jerry and the Pacemakers.
Absolutely.
We'd be having the same conversation.
Well, I know you said that Jerry Marsden was your good friend. That
Bernie Marsden, yeah.
Oh, Bernie Marsden.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood you.
No, here I go again on my own.
White Snake.
Yeah, White Snake. He wrote that tune with Coverdale.
He was a great guitarist.
Yep. We played the tune at the Songwriters Festival the other day to honor him. We also played a Tina Turner tune to honor her. We're losing some people, and every time we lose somebody, we just play it. When John McLaughlin came to town and played with us, that was the day B.B. King died, so we did The Thrill Is Gone. These tunes are starting to be around my band because we're losing people.
Yeah, it's a good thing you even brought that up, too. I was thinking about that the other day. Now we're in a time period ourselves, too, because we're all younger here in this room. You know, we're coming to a time where all of our heroes basically are going to start passing in a way. You know, we're going to outlive all of these people, unfortunately. Well, thankfully, in a way, you know. And yeah, it's sad. You know, it's sad that we're seeing it's like almost like a checklist, and you're seeing all the good ones starting to fade off. And you know, there's going to be more coming too in the next few years. You know, it's sad to think about. Losing a lot of good musicians.
There's a thing that I go by that gives me some solace in these moments. And although Sam Ash died, the famous Sam Ash music.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I'm going to the service tomorrow. And that is that the dead take very good care of the dead. When somebody dies, the dead handle the dead beautifully. It's the people that are still alive you've got to worry about. And for me, anytime anybody dies, I'm worried about the people that are alive every single time. And when somebody said the dead take beautiful care of the dead, it was very good for me to hear. But watching the aftermath of the living people has been horrific, and there have been some that have never gotten out of it, and that I know. And for me, you know, as these passings happen, if they had a beautiful, complete life, I think that's to be honored. What I'm worried about is the people that were so close to him. I mean, did you hear what Johnny Cash said about his wife when she died? He said, I traded all away, all my fame, all my money, anything, to have her back for one day. You know, and I never thought when Paul turned 64 he would be in the middle of a lawsuit over a divorce. Which I found hysterical. You know, he was in a divorce. When I'm 64, I'm going to be in divorce court. I don't think that's what he was thinking. But John Lennon said, life's what happened to us after we make plans. And I quote it constantly.
Yeah. Well, John is an interesting person to think about with this conversation we're having, because songs like In My Life are like absolutely biographical. Like, he lost so many people that were important to him at a young age. Like, he lost, well, his parents split and he lived with his aunt, and his mom got killed by a drunk driver when he was like 16 or 17, and then his and his uncle who raised him before that had died when he was a little bit younger, and then his best friend Stuart Sutcliffe, who was in the Beatles for a little while, he died of I believe a brain hemorrhage or something like that in 1962, and I think they were about to come back and visit him and like tell him like, oh, we got this. They were starting to make progress in getting popular in 62, and they were excited to share that with him, and then he didn't get to. And then of course Brian Epstein then becomes their manager, and then he is John's best man at his wedding, and then Brian goes and he died in 1967, and John just kept losing people left and right, and he had a rough time of it.
But Paul McCartney too,
I didn't know. Wait a minute. I didn't know all that.
Did you want me to recap some of
that?
No.
I heard every word. I'm just putting myself in his shoes. You got an anointed one who's losing people like flies.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know. It makes a lot of sense.
And he bonded with, this was Sam was about to say, he bonded with Paul because both of their mothers died around the same time. Paul's mother died when he was 15 with breast cancer, I think.
I didn't know that either.
So, and it kind of goes back. I know we're kind of talking on a somber mood, too, which is not the best way to end any of this, but also, some of the best songwriting has come from pain. And I feel like, a lot of them that have experienced the pain write really great music.
Some of the best comedy comes from pain.
Yeah, you're right about that, too. You're right. It could go both spectrums if you think about it.
Yeah, got to make it something good out of it.
Yeah, true. Paul, did you have anything else you wanted to share with us?
No, I think this has been a good chewing on the bones. We've been chewing on the bones of the band and chewing on the bones of the music and chewing on the bones of our memories. Look, in the end, it wasn't one tune or one thing. It wasn't Smoke on the Water. That's not what it was. It was this catalog of extraordinary stuff that kept growing and growing and growing and growing and growing. They never got stagnant. They never got calcified. They just kept growing. That's the part that we keep mentioning about this that's so cool. Some bands peak and that's it. This band just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And they became studio rats. They became really good at using a studio to be a art palette. A studio is a place to do surgery on music. And boy, they got good at it. And supposedly, according to, I'll remember his name in a minute, Pink Floyd was that way. They were very, very adept at using the studio as a tool to do what they needed to do.
Yeah, David Gilmour had that little boat or whatever he did all the recording of. I know they did a bunch of studio stuff, and I know David Gilmour led a lot of that.
You were talking about Revolver being your favorite album, and
yeah,
it's crazy that and even Sgt. Pepper were all on 4-track tapes. Like, they hadn't even gotten to 8-track yet for another couple of years.
Yeah, they had in the U.S., but they had in England.
Right,
they found out, it pissed them off.
Yeah, they complained about that in that documentary. They're like, hey, how come the Beach Boys got this? And Michael Lindsay Hogg, who's directing the documentary, says, well, the Beach Boys are American. So they have a little laugh over that.
It's hard to believe Revolver was 4-track.
Yeah.
That's extraordinary. They used to call them balancing engineers, not mix engineers. They would balance the volume of the parts.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
That was a real skill set with the faders. Today you can automate it, but back then you had to use all 10 of your fingers to control the levels.
Think about a Queen mix of Killer Queen without automation. There were 10 people at the console moving knobs, right? I mean, they worked really hard on those mixes. I mean, Killer Queen is, it was a brand new piece of extraordinary music that had come out. And the Beatles were doing the same thing. They were pushing the limits big time.
Yeah, like Freddie Mercury's voice on the song Lazing on a Sunday Afternoon, where they put it in a little tin can, the microphone, and then in a shower, and then recorded it, experimenting endlessly with different sounds.
Yeah.
So.
We learned...
the Beatles...
Oh, I was going to say, we learned not too long ago when we did an episode on While My Guitar Gently Weeps, and we learned that the Les Paul that Eric Clapton plays, that I think it's, what's his name? The engineer, they wanted to add this wobbly sound to the guitar, and which maybe added to the sort of weeping sound that the guitar is supposed to be making. And he did this, he stuck like a pencil in the oscillator, and like for hours was just sort of slightly speeding up and slowing down the tape to try and get these little wobbles all over the place. But it wasn't like a Leslie or anything you could do like sort of automated. It was an incredibly manual process.
Yeah. They called it a flanger because you pushed on the flange of the reel.
That's what made it all the more cool.
Well, they were using these tools to do a job, right? I mean, if they had to edit something and somebody had played a note ahead of the beat, they had to cut it out and slide it over with clear tape. I mean, they were called cutters, these people. Anyway, unbelievable. Just unbelievable.
Definitely something to be said for creativity is birthed in the realm of limitations.
Look, this was a joy to do. I didn't know if you were going to... I was prepared to say I don't know 20 times. But I didn't have to say it because we touch on all things that are my memories of the Beatles. And, I don't know what microphone they used on Rubber Soul. I couldn't tell you. I have no idea.
Yeah, we were planning to ask you more like just your experience with like the guitars of the time and like how wood has changed. Like if you ever want to do it again, we got definitely more questions that are like, how has wood changed? Sure. Yeah.
Sure, we could do it, but we ended up talking about these human beings' impact on society is what we ended up talking about.
Yeah. And in many ways, a far grander thing to talk about.
Maybe not.
But then again, you do have a business that's based on all the other things.
Yeah. I never got a chance to show John Lennon a guitar. It would have been fun. I'm sure he was decent. I got to make a guitar for Jimmy Page once. I used it on the Outrider tour, and I met him. And I've had some interesting experiences. I don't know. You're talking about four of the godfathers of the music business.
Yeah. I was curious. I did want to ask you, I'm a big fan of the Hollies, and I know Tony Hicks, I believe he started playing PRS in the mid-'80s.
Yeah, he still does.
Are you, have you met him?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, he's probably my favorite guitarist.
He's been emailing me forever when he needs things. I have a question. Where's Dom's accent from?
Me?
Yeah, you.
Chicago.
That fits.
Is it that obvious?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Sure as shit ain't Maryland.
Yeah, we're all over the place. Obviously,
all over the place.
Maryland, he's Chicago, and then Paul is in Rhode Island, and Sam's in New York, but from Pennsylvania.
So kind of more of the East Coast area.
It would have been a lot easier to have everybody in one room. But we would have had to flown in. Yeah.
Is that a 65 twin sitting behind you, Sam?
65 Bassman. 74 Pro Reverb, new Deluxe Reverb, new AC30. Yeah, but the 65 Bassman's my favorite.
And you don't have an old twin?
I don't. The Pro Reverb's supposed to be my sort of twin reverb thing. Are you a fan of twin reverbs?
Pro Reverb is a deluxe super reverb, twin reverb, in the middle mix. That's what a Pro is.
I get the best of all of them. Sort of.
We need to listen. You want to have a talk about Fender amps? I know a lot about those circuits.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that would be so much fun. Look, thanks for having me on. I almost never wear headphones except when I'm recording vocals in the studio. And you all have interesting mics up. So of all the mics that you have, which is the best sounding mic in the room?
Ooh. So I've got a Warm Audio. It's a Warm Audio U47, basically a clone of a U47. But
Sounds good.
Very cheap.
I got a real Neumann here.
I know. Sam, that was you, right?
Yeah.
I thought that was the clearest mic in the group, and the most podcast group mic in the group was Dom's, and the most natural was Ryan's. And I don't know what you're using, Paul. I can't see it.
Oh, Warm Audio, just like Ryan.
And there you go. And I'm using a shit love. All right, guys. Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it,
Paul.
Paul.
Thanks for
a
having
lot.
me on. You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.